Welcome to The Friday Habit with Mark Labriola and Benjamin Manley. The Friday Habit is for small business owners, freelancers, and creatives who are ready to take their business to the next level. Join us as we discover how to apply the strategies we learned to grow our businesses, make more money, and live every day like it's Friday. And welcome back to another episode of The Friday Habit. It's a great habit to have, a Friday one. If you're going to do a habit, if you can get to Friday, that'd be great. But hey, we got a special guest for you on the episode today. We got Nick Courtright, and he's the founder and executive editor of Atmosphere Press, a literary hybrid publisher that provides meaningful and rewarding experiences to writers. Well, Nick, welcome to The Friday Habit.
Thanks for having me. I'm glad to
Dr.
be here.
Nick.
Don't worry, we won't spend too much time talking about poetry on this. This is a business podcast, so
I'm curious. I'm trying to think of I've always wondered how does one get into poetry? It's like
it's like a weird drug.
Yeah, it's like, did you get your heart breaking? In fourth grade, and you're writing a little. Poem about that. What was your gateway into poetry writing?
Oh man, well, heartbreak, of course, is going to be a piece of the puzzle, right? So it wasn't quite fourth grade, but by the time I was in high school, I was well on my way to being, your prototypical sad sack poet. But then, ultimately, over the course of time, studied it, enjoyed it as an art form, and then ended up getting a master's degree and a PhD, and becoming a college literature professor. So that was sort of the path that I was on, before sort of taking a crazy detour into entrepreneurship. But yeah, poetry, writing, that was definitely in the blood from the start.
Yeah, is your family writers, or do you come from a long lineage of creatives?
No, I do not. I mean, my dad's definitely sort of an eccentric linguist of sorts, he likes to, play with language. So I've got some, creativity. There's a lot of comedy in my family. But writers, no. I'm descended from farmers, coal miners, steel workers, okay. So the leap into this was...
You break that that trend. It's no, we're going a new way.
Yeah, a bit of a left turn there. I don't know how well I would do in a coal mine. I think that I'd probably wear myself out in there after.
Have you ever seen Zoolander before?
Many years ago.
Well, there's a scene where he goes to work in the coal mine, and he's a model, and he's got his sledgehammer over his shoulder, and he's like, "I've got the black lung pop," and he's coughing, and it's so funny.
Yeah,
if you haven't seen Zoolander in a long time, you should pull that one back out because it is over the top ridiculous.
Yeah, it sounds edifying. It'd be a very educational experience, I'm sure.
Yeah. Well, I'm curious about some of this stuff. So, the Forgotten World, when you write, is it a poetry book? Are each one of these their own themed poetry collections, haikus?
Yeah, not haikus, but they each do have their sort of own theme. So the first one,
so the Forgotten World.
Yeah, the Forgotten World is the most recent one, and that one was sort of based on a lot of travel. Going around the world, trying to see and deal with what it is to be an American in a global context. But then also, after I'd done all of this travel, COVID hit. And we were sort of in a position in which the rest of the world became forgotten, right? That's kind of the theme behind the book, is that there's this whole wider world out there, but we were all just sitting inside of our houses, watching, what is that show about tigers?
The Tiger King. That my gosh, I remember every Zoom call I got on was did you see the latest episode of Tiger King?
Yeah, that's how that society is on the brink of a total collapse, right?
Exactly. When the Tiger King is the talk of the town.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so that book was, about that.
Okay. and Let There Be Light? I mean, does that have some sort of spiritual undertone?
Yeah, definitely.
Creator of the universe said, "Let there be light."
Yeah, so that one is actually sort of unwinding that, biblical Genesis creation story backwards. So it sort of starts on, like the seventh day of rest, and then sort of as the book progresses, it moves back into time until there's literally nothing but blackness. So that's sort of the theme behind that one.
Dude, that sounds like a great premise for like a sci-fi novel.
Yeah,
Where it's
yeah.
like, did you ever see that movie, Memento?
Oh, great movie.
Dude,
Classic.
such a good movie, right?
Yeah.
And that's one I can't wait, because my son is a big fan of Christopher Nolan, and so some of the Prestige and Interstellar, like, these movies, my son's like, oh, this is awesome. He's only 13, but that was the one that's a little bit more gritty, and it's like earlier, So I was like, I probably should need to wait to watch that with him, but I can't wait to like watch that, because it is such a great study of just film writing and like creative story development and all that kind of stuff. So
Absolutely. Yeah, like that one, it's crazy you mentioned watching it with your kid, because I have a 15-year-old, and I've had like
Okay.
this list of movies where I'm like, okay, are we ready for like the crazy
Yeah.
violent ones? And like, I've been slowly but surely like chipping them away. And I actually watched Fight Club with him last week,
Oh
and I was like,
yeah.
is he ready for Fight Club? I was like, Fight Club's pretty messed up, but we watched
Yeah.
that. Have not knocked out Memento, have not done Pulp Fiction. That's sort of a holy grail
Okay.
one there, but I think it's a
Yeah.
little bit raw for a youngster for sure.
Yeah. Yeah, especially Pulp Fiction. It's like, okay, there's some really intense stuff in this movie. Yeah, anything Tarantino, I'm kind of like haven't like showed him yet, because I'm like, okay, that's a little bit over the top. But, and there's some stuff too, as a parent, I'm like, well, if I condone this, I don't know how like good that is. So I'm like, this is a really good movie, but maybe when you leave my house, you should watch
we'll
it, and then we
save
can
that
talk
one.
about it. Yeah. Yeah. So, but I like that. Let there be light, like this reverse from the day of rest all the way back to nothingness, because they do say the universe is expanding constantly. Like it's constantly expanding. And so my thought would be, well, if it's constantly expanding, then that means that it had to have started at some point,
Yeah,
So,
absolutely. Yeah, and I think, and I do, think in that book about the relationship between, that biblical story and like how scientists say that it all went down. So there's definitely
yeah.
an interplay between those things and the nature of time and all that crazy stuff. And if I, at that point, when that book came out, it was 2014, and I founded Atmosphere Press in 2015. So
Okay.
when that book came out, I wasn't thinking very capitalistically, because I probably should have, tried to do that content like as a sci-fi novel. It probably would have,
Right.
that would have made it more marketable, of course. But
Yeah. So with that, are you like, is it something that you think about when you're writing content? Like, okay, is this something that the marketplace needs, and should I write it? Or is it typically just like, I'm passionate, I'm a writer, and I just write. I mean, I feel like sometimes, back in my youth, I was a songwriter. So it was like a lot of times I wrote songs from a place of desperation or sadness or happiness or whatever it was, right? But then when we got signed, the label was like, we need a catchy song. We need something for the radio, something more poppy, like, whatever it was. So then it was like a forced writing where it's like, all right, there's this formula that I need to follow, and I need to try to connect with this certain type of audience. And so let me try to write a song that would work.
yeah, so from my perspective, and this is something that, is a big part of the company as well, is just wanting to not manipulate an author's vision, right? That it's like we uphold author rights, we uphold their autonomy. Like, we want to help them become the best writer that they can be within their own sort of aesthetic and within their own tastes. And that comes from like my own writing practice. It's like I used to, when I was younger, I would try to write to please people. But now I've sort of the really the only real audience is the self, right? Like that's who you've got to please. If you like it, there's going to be an audience out there, whether it's an
Right.
audience of millions, that's a different question. But yeah, I definitely am a big fan of creating art, for yourself, because that's where the real pleasure is.
Yeah, totally. We had Hugh Howey on the podcast. I don't know if you familiar with any of his work. He wrote the series Silo. That I think it became like a Apple TV series. Or it did become but his original book was called Wool, and he wrote it as like a short story kind of thing, and he couldn't get anybody to pick it up, and so he just put it out there, like self-published it, like on Amazon or something like that. And then it started getting some traction and people were like, hey, like there needs to be more to this story. Like this is fantastic. And so it was like overnight success. Like he, like years and years of writing and doing all this stuff. And then he just kind of put this out there and the audience found it. And then he kind of redeveloped it. Have you read it before at all?
I have
The
not.
Wool
I have
series?
not. But I
Do you like sci-fi?
yeah, and I do like know of those kinds of stories, right? Where
Right.
it's like, an overnight success that was years in the making,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, exactly. It's like, oh, I was successful overnight. It just took like 20 years of overnights.
Yeah. Yeah, right. Like nothing just sort of like plops out like fully formed. There's always, going to be this like behind the scenes grind, that then when when it gets out there, then things
Right.
can happen.
Well, yeah, and this is something that I heard recently. I was at this networking event, and the speaker came up and he gave the analogy of the water pump, and it's like a famous kind of like motivational. I think Zig Ziglar maybe started the idea back in the 70s or 80s, whenever it was. But it's the idea, I don't know if you've ever pumped water before, like out of a water pump, right? But it's this idea of you start pumping and nothing's happening. And depending on how deep the well is, you really have to pump a lot in order to get the water to come up. And then at some point, once you get the water up and it starts coming out, then it's a lot easier to pump. But you really have to be pumping. And if you stop pumping, then all the water flows back down to the bottom of the well. And then you have to kind of restart all over again. So the idea is like you just need to keep pumping. And then when you start seeing some results, you'll start getting some traction, some momentum, and then you won't have to pump as hard or as much. And you can get a good flow. And I feel like that's kind of a lot of times all of us are working on our businesses or working on a book or whatever it might be. And it's this idea of like, yeah, you kind of have to put in this hard work and keep grinding and pushing and pushing and pushing. And then at some point, you showing up every day, you working hard, you doing your best is going to pay off. And that will start to show in some of these little things. And then it'll start to kind of snowball and it won't be as difficult to get the results that you're looking for.
Yeah, totally. That actually reminds me a lot of that super famous book, Good to Great, by Jim Collins, where he talks about the flywheel, right? And it's
Right,
like,
exactly.
you just like got to keep on pushing and keep pushing and keep pushing. And that like a big mistake that people get into is they don't run the experiment for long enough.
Right.
Like they'll get right up to that point where like in the water pump analogy, it's like right there, it's just about to start coming out. And then they're like, screw it, there's nothing in this well anyway.
Yeah.
And it's like, then they like quit. And it's like, no, you really just needed to keep going. And I think that's always an interesting challenge in business is like, how long do you keep pumping? Because maybe the well is dry, like you don't know, right? So how long to run an experiment before you bail on it, like how much effort to go in, like there's a lot of variables there to try to balance.
Well, yeah, and I think too, it's probably having the right people around you and some good friends you can bounce stuff off of, peers that are probably in the similar space, entrepreneurs, whatever, and then potentially like a mentor or somebody, right, who you can go to and be like, hey, this is my idea, or this is what I've been doing. Is it good? Should I keep doing it, or should I, bounce on it? Because, yeah, a lot of times time seems a little bit, we always think stuff should happen faster than it actually does. It's like, this is taking forever. And then someone's like, oh, you should be at least, 2 or 3 more years before something happens, I mean, and they say, especially with small businesses, like the average small business is like 3 to 5 years before it fails. And so,
Brutal.
if you're grinding for like 6 months, it's like, well, I think you probably need to grind a little bit longer before you can really decide if this is working or not, But then I guess it comes down to market research and some other types of things too. If you're actually offering something to the marketplace needs, and
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, I just went through this, with Atmosphere, where we'd had a certain lead source that we've been, buying leads from, for months and months, and they just like weren't really panning out. They just weren't the best leads, right? But then I kept being like, oh, it's the flywheel, it's like we don't want to stop too soon. We don't want to pull the plug on it before, you don't want to chop the tree down before it bears fruit, right?
Right.
So, but eventually, like this month, finally, after like 6 months or something, I was like, okay, like, let's just stop getting fresh leads from this source and see if any of the leads that we've gotten in the last 6 months like start turning into anything. If they start turning into something, then we'll be like, well, darn, we shouldn't have like turned that off, but we could restart it if we needed to. But there's also that great thing where it's like throwing good money after bad, right? It's like, it hasn't been working. Well, maybe now, that we've sunk
throw
this
some
cost,
more money at it.
Let's double down. You have like, you're playing poker and you've got like like a 3 and a 9 in your hand and you're like all in, like.
Right. So what was that with Atmosphere? How long have you been doing that? What was the catalyst for that? And what did you look into the marketplace and say, you know what, we need another publisher?
Yeah, well, the fact is that I didn't look into the marketplace and think that. I was just a college literature professor, and I did a little bit of writing coaching on the side. I had some publishing experience from having my own books published, and I was working with an author. This was back in 2015, and he wanted some help putting his book out. So, we looked at traditional publishing routes or self-publishing, and it was like, neither one of these is really going to be the right fit. So I just invented a press to put his book out. And his book was a kind of like about the universe, so Atmosphere Press wasn't an appropriate name. And that became the first Atmosphere book. And then after that, another author needed help, and then another author, and then another, and then another, and then another. And then all of a sudden, like, it just turned into a thing. And then by the time 2020 rolled around, I quit academia, went all in on this. And now here we are, we've published 1,200 authors.
Wow.
So it wasn't really like me, like entrepreneurially, like seeing a market need. It was like me just sort of waking up to the fact that the market kept knocking on my door. Right.
Yeah.
And right from the very start, we knew we wanted to be a different kind of publisher. We wanted to be author rights focused. We wanted to be high autonomy. We wanted to be super transparent. There are a lot of shady people and shady businesses in the, writing and publishing space. A lot of people who will just lie to you, tell you whatever you want to hear, give you shady contracts, take your rights away. We didn't want to do any of that. So I just made it right from the start that we were going to be like straight up, that we were going to just be an honest service provider, and, work on putting out good books and respecting authors. And it's worked out.
Yeah, that's really cool. And that's awesome to kind of be working your day job, doing a side hustle, and then organically that side hustle just kind of turned into your main thing. Was that hard to make that pivot? Or, I mean, I assume you spent a lot of time and money to pursue the academic, route, and then all of a sudden you're like, I think I'm going to go do this thing. Or were you getting burned out, like teaching college kids writing, and was your love of it gone, or what?
Like, it was definitely a confluence of a lot of things. I was getting burned out on teaching. Like, I'd been doing that for a dozen years, and, that's a very unforgiving industry. Unless you get one of the, like, coveted, like, tenure track positions with a sweet teaching load, like, you're probably sort of being treated like crap, right? Like,
just
not
doing all the dirty work.
Yeah, not being paid terribly well, not having a ton of job security. like just sort of being a
Yeah.
teaching mule, right? So I mean, I loved that job for a long time. But then actually in 2018, I had a teaching gig, and I got laid off. And that was definitely something that, sort of opened things up where I was like, oh, I need to like start like putting more into this atmosphere press thing, right? And at that point, like it was like me and I had like a couple contractors like helping me out, and now we have like 50 people, right?
Yeah, that's awesome.
So it was hard to leave that industry though. Like I was
Right.
nervous about it, because I knew that I could do it. I knew I could make ends meet, teaching classes, but eventually it just became like blatantly apparent that like this was going to be the better path. This was going to be a way for me to take control of my own destiny, and be able to have more of a say in my outcomes, more financial opportunities, and be able to help people.
Yeah, that's awesome. You said you had a 15-year-old. So do you have a family?
Yeah. I've got two sons, a 15-year-old and a 10-year-old, and my wife Lisa, who's also a writer.
Okay.
So yeah, so we're here living in Austin, and
Okay.
trying to survive.
I know Austin's crazy. I'm gonna actually. My cousin lives in Austin, and he's getting married in Temple, which is just
North of
above
here, yeah.
Austin. Yeah, exactly. So we'll be out there next month. But yeah, it's been growing like crazy. It's like, how long have you been out there?
I moved to Austin for I came down here for my master's degree back
Yeah,
in
okay.
2004. So
Okay.
I have been in Austin for 20 years. So
So you've seen it really change, all the
yeah,
traffic and construction and
when I came here, it was still like slacker city, like
yeah,
it's like,
keeping it weird.
people smoking a joint going to a concert, right? The live
Right.
music capital.
South by
And
Southwest was kind of like the thing.
yeah, it was like, yeah, it was new,
Right.
right? And like ACL, like the music festival,
Austin
I
City
think
Limits,
that
yeah.
started in like 2003, 2004, thereabouts.
Okay.
So yeah, it definitely was sort of like a heyday for the rise of Austin, whereas now it's just like this booming like tech town,
Right.
and
Yeah,
that
you got
was,
Teslas moving in there, and I
yeah.
don't know who else, but
Yeah, I mean it's definitely changed things. There's still like all the same cool stuff that was here before is still
yeah,
here,
good barbecue.
but then and then the breakfast tacos, right?
The
Uh,
breakfast tacos,
yeah, but
donuts. There's a donut truck that we went to that I was like, oh my gosh, it's the best donut I ever had.
yeah, we definitely crush on food trucks. There's no doubt
Yeah.
about that.
That's awesome. Yeah, Austin, it definitely is one of those places where it's like, man, if you can buy some real estate, or if you were able to buy some real estate 5, 10 years ago, it's probably doing pretty well for you.
Yeah. The key part is if you were able to then.
Yeah,
Right.
teacher,
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I was able to get a house back in 2010, and
Okay,
yeah, that
nice.
that place definitely appreciated, pretty nicely over the
Yeah.
years.
Denver is very similar to that too. We've been growing like crazy, and a lot of tech companies moving in here, and people putting plants and stuff out east where it's real flat and whatnot. And,
Yeah,
and then we're centrally located. We have an international airport, so it's kind of like a good hub to some extent.
absolutely.
But yeah, so I totally get that. So was your wife also in academia when you guys were? How long have you been married?
We've just been together for 5 years,
Oh, okay.
so yeah. So she is my newer my partner, and yeah, she was just a writer. We connected through the writing community, and that's how we ended up meeting. So she had the good fortune to not be in academia, though. She actually
Okay.
worked in insurance when we met. So.
Okay.
But
So then did she kind of have to hold down the fort and help you out when things were just like getting started, or I mean, what was that like?
Oh yeah, definitely. Like especially when the pandemic hit. So when the pandemic hit, that was when things sort of really started taking off for us because we were in an industry where, it costs money to do. It costs money to publish a book.
Right.
Like you need to invest in that. and people no longer had restaurants or vacations or movie theaters to spend their money on. So a lot of people turned to these, passion projects that they had. They were
Right.
like, oh, now I can I was going to go on vacation, but now I'm going to invest in, this other part of my identity. So things got really busy. And because also wasn't traveling or going out to eat anywhere, I was just working like a million hours a week. You talk about like the Friday habit.
Yeah.
Like I had no Friday habit. It's like 100 days of Monday in a row, know? So at that point, so she was definitely like really helping me a lot. At that point, I was still doing all the sales calls. I was doing a lot of the cover design for the books. I was still like navigating a lot of that stuff. And
The one-man band.
Yeah, like I had team, but I just hadn't built out like enough team at that point. And then, she was definitely helping me like set things up and basically just like make sure that I was getting enough calories to keep working, right? But now, it's more like built out. Now I'm actually able to be more of, an executive, as opposed to like in the trenches on the books. I've hired people to, actually work on the books who are more qualified than I am to do a lot of these tasks.
Nice.
So I'm more sort of captaining the ship right now rather than, making sure that everything's running.
Did you land on a certain like system or process that like was a light bulb for you? Like were you kind of grinding and doing these things and then something started to work and then you're like, oh, let me double down on this? I mean, you said you were buying the leads and things like that, but like what kind of stuff were you doing before that where you're able to kind of grow your team and take things to the next level?
Yeah, I think really the hiring people, was a big part, because that is for anybody who's like starting a business, that's always really scary, especially if you're like a bootstrapped, like more like a lifestyle sort of company where you start it yourself, right? Like you're not necessarily looking for seed capital or something like that. You're just trying to make something happen. Is that you are the expert who knows how to do all the things, and then you need to hire other people to take things on. And it's always really scary because they're not necessarily going to do it exactly the way that you do it. So there's always fear. It's like, oh, can I trust this person? Are they going to do a good job? Are they going to bake the cake the way that I want the cake to be baked? Right?
Yeah.
Kinds of questions. But I think relatively, early on around that like pandemic era, like I realized that it was absolutely essential that I, hire people and that I have a lot of trust in them. And we've been a remote company all along. Our team is 100% remote.
Nice.
And people have a lot of autonomy about like where in the world they are when they do their work, what hours they work. So trust was just a really sort of huge part of it, right from the start. And that was something that made me proud and was definitely a thing that helped us, grow, was just me feeling like I could empower people to sort of take the lead on things.
Yeah, I totally agree. And that is one of the scarier parts too, because are most of your people contractors, or do you have like W-2 contractors and like virtual, like assistant type people?
We're mostly contractor based because a lot of like the editors, they might only work on like 1 or 2 projects a month, stuff like that. But then we have W-2 people as well, and people who are long term. Most of our staff, regardless of what their sort of employment status is, they have been working for us, or with us for a long time.
Nice.
So, we don't really have much churn at all. Like the retention
really
rate's
key.
pretty amazing. Most everybody has been around for years.
Nice.
So that's definitely another thing that I think is.
Do you focus on
a good culture?
Yeah, and that's one of the things I was going to ask. Is like, do you focus on the culture aspect of it? I mean, you said you have 50 people working with you, so like, do you have a core of people where you're like, okay, there's these people who kind of do these tasks. Like, here we have certain people that we bring in 1099 where it's like, yeah, for a handful of things, but they're kind of a part of the team, but they're not like on the day-to-day business. And maybe they have their own thing that they're doing and building, but they come alongside and work with us, and they've been, trusted partners. And then we have people who are like kind of working a lot in our space, and they're not, maybe not W-2, but they're kind of a part of the team in some ways because they do so much work with us. And then we have our, W-2 team. And so how do you, like, with as many people as you have, do you focus on building culture, or like, and you're being remote, so like, do you have like team meetings or certain types of gatherings virtually or in person that you like do to kind of keep everybody together and kind of cohesive?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question, and it is a challenge. I mean, with a fully remote team, like that's sort of a blessing and a curse. It's really amazing. We can attract talent from all over the place. People have a large amount of autonomy in how they run their work life. All that stuff is amazing. In terms of trying to maintain culture, we do have sort of a set of, company like guiding principles that we do try to reinforce about, just all this sort of like positive stuff, right? And trying to foster accountability and foster like enjoying the workplace and like taking pride in the work that you do. So that's definitely something also that we try to, instill in people. We do sort of have like a core team where we talk through like our quarterly planning and all of that sort of stuff. We do have, all hands meetings, but they're pretty infrequent.
Nice.
Like I guess I am influenced by my own experience in my career, is that a lot of times when they'd be like, oh, we're going to have a big faculty meeting or whatever, I would just groan.
Yeah, it's like, oh no, not the faculty meeting.
Yeah. So like,
give us your 10-year plan. That was always the thing for me. It's like when you're clocking in every day and then they want you to have some sort of like big vision for yourself and the company. And you're just like, I'm not that invested here.
Yeah, exactly. And like, I try to be respectful, of people's time. Like, I think that atmosphere sort of like writ large as an organization is that we are a high autonomy organization, both for employees, people who work with us, and for the clients who we serve. Is that I want people to sort of be able to, have the life that they want to have. Right. Mm-hmm.
And then you kind of will provide as much or as little support or whatever as they need.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, definitely. Definitely like a supportive environment, an open environment. We try to, keep as much of an open door policy as you can have, when we're all just on the internet, right?
Are you still head of sales? Are you like running the sales, or do you have like a sales team yet?
Yeah. I don't do any sales calls, thankfully, anymore. I used to do like a bajillion of those.
Right.
But yeah, no, now we have a sales team. We got a really great, director of acquisitions who's closing deals left and right, and a number of other acquisitions editors who are on the phone with authors trying to see if it's a good match, between us as a publisher and them as an author and what they're trying to accomplish. I'm no longer, in the sort of client-facing role.
Yeah. So what does that look like as far as setting goals and, when you get together with that executive team or whatnot? Like, how do you set those goals or set those things that you want to achieve for like that next year or that next quarter or what?
I mean, we read a lot. Like, I read a lot, of, business self-help books, right? Yeah. Like, I'm always trying to educate myself because this isn't my background. I don't have an MBA, right? So I really try to, and I think that in a lot of ways that's like helped the company, right? Because we've just sort of been able to build it with the client in mind, from the start without being, overly obsessed with like investors or an exit. Like, we don't have investors, like we're not worried about that type of stuff, right? So a lot of it is in a sense just trying to be receptive to what our clients say they want. If we get enough clients who are like, oh, I really want you to just give a very recent example. A lot of clients were like, oh, I wish that you guys would submit books for prizes. Like I wish that you guys would do more of that. And so once you hear that enough times from enough authors, it's like, hey, maybe we should do that, you know? Yeah. So we try to keep our ears open, like we do track like Net Promoter Score, we do surveys, with our clients to try to like listen to what they want and try to find out what our gaps are. So that's a big thing. And then also, just trying to be innovation minded, be experimental. Like I used to be a little bit more risk averse, in terms of, we didn't want to try something unless we knew it was going to work. Yeah. Right. And now I'm more of a like throw it at the wall and see what sticks, kind of approach. And I think that's good because, you just got to run experiments. Some of them will fail. That's okay. Amazon had the Fire Phone, right?
Yes.
Google had the Fire Google Glass,
phone. Right? Apple had a game console, I think, or something like that back in the
probably
late 90s or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, everybody's flopped at times, so I think, when we're having like our quarterly meeting, a lot of times I'll just have like a huge list of like, these are a bunch of things that I've been thinking about that have been coming up. And then we just like systematically like start working on trying to knock things out and, make sure we don't fall behind on things. But, as with anything, sometimes things are easier than they are others.
Yeah. What do you guys have, like a guiding principle or a vision or a value statement or something like that kind of keeps you grounded? And what point did you put one of those into place? Like, do you have to remind people, like, hey, remember, like, we're here to serve these authors, and help them be successful.
Yeah, so we actually have a number of sort of things that we use to help with that. So, like, from the very first time, way back in like 2015, that I built an Atmosphere website, like on it, we put that our like 5 things were, honesty, transparency, professionalism, kindness, and making your book awesome. So we had those 5 things. And I think those first 4, like professionalism, kindness, honesty, and transparency, those have really been like useful guiding principles like throughout. That's why, like, for example, we have our publishing contract, our author contract is on our website. It's like, it's publicly available. Like there are like no other presses that I know of that just like make that public. Right. So we were just like, we just want to make it transparent. So
it's like open source.
So we like threw it right out there. And if it's a good fit for you, great. If it's not, great. And so we had that right from the start. More recently, we did come up with a list of like 24 sort of internal guiding principles. We have a list of like acceptance standards, like questions that we ask to see whether an author is somebody who we're willing to work with, because we are selective in the projects that we take on. So we've got a number of different systems in place to, make sure that we stay on track as an organization.
Yeah. I think that's important. And, I think it'll help you in the long term if you kind of have that North Star or those guiding principles, because then you can kind of see if you're ever falling off track or if you're not living up to that, or if you're doing something now for money or fame or whatever that might be, opposed to for like, why did we originally start doing this thing, And so it keeps people happy.
I think there's a lot of like, ethics slippage, that can happen in businesses. And that's definitely something where like in our hiring process, like we always try to like make sure that we're hiring good people, right?
Yeah. It's so
and that's, it seems, like that would be easier than it actually is.
It's hard. It's hard. It's like you really have to vet. I think that's one of the things, you hear a lot is like hire quick, fire quick, or hire slow, fire quick. But it's never one of those things where to me, I feel like over the years, sometimes I've hired slow and I fired slow, which was always a mistake. I think it's always a mistake to fire slow.
Yeah.
But then there's times where you like hire quick, and it's like, oh crap, this isn't a good fit. I better bail sooner than later because it's just going to get harder and harder to fire this person or move on from them.
Yeah.
But that is one of those things where it's like, the better you can vet somebody before you hire them, the higher likelihood of them sticking around is going to be there, you know?
Yeah, and I mean that's something that I was just like coaching a particular department of my team on, is like just because somebody like crushes the first interview doesn't necessarily mean that they're, going to be a good fit, right?
Yeah.
So it's like going through the process, like really sort of like digging in, to make sure that this is going to be a good fit, because it's like, and I want it to be a good fit, not just for us. I want it to be a good fit for the person we're hiring,
Yeah.
So, because we obviously don't want to have to fire somebody like that. Feels terrible,
Yeah.
right? We don't want to do it. Everybody loses, right? But we also don't want somebody to quit, right? So I think making sure that you're, putting in the time to, get the right team on board, that I think that's a really big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, no, I agree. Do you use overseas help at all, or do you work with any contractors like in the Philippines or like other places like that?
Very little,
Okay.
very little. We do have an international team. Like we've got proofreaders who are in the United Kingdom because they do the proofreading for our UK authors, right?
Right.
Like our art director is based in Rio de Janeiro. Like
Okay.
he's been our art director for 5 years, right? So we do have, an international team, but we're not, a company where we're just trying to like, ship every book off, to Cambodia, to be put together for like $100 in a sweatshop, right?
Yeah.
Like, and on our masthead, like on our website, you can actually see our whole team
nice.
there. Like we have everybody on our team like listed on the website. So just another nod to that transparency piece.
Right. Yeah, that's cool. Yeah, I've tried to dabble in some of the overseas stuff, but it's never really worked out, and I haven't found a really good fit. I don't think it's not possible, but I haven't seen anything that's like just been amazing, and some of the work that I've gotten back has been subpar, and so it's like we have really high standards here, and I'm like, I tried, but it's hard. And I think growing is one of those things where it is kind of a risk, right? Where it's like sometimes you got to take that jump before you can kind of hit the next level of growth. It's like, all right, I need to bring on somebody to do these things so that I can bring in more work and support that. But there's that risk that you're taking earlier on,
Yeah, it's definitely a lot of tricky things to balance. And I think that that's one of the fun things about, being a business owner, is that there are always more problems, right? There's always more stuff to solve, more stuff to research, more stuff to think through, more mistakes to make, and I think that really like keeps it fun. It obviously also can keep it very stressful at times. Right. But ideally, like you've set yourself up in a way where you can have some Friday, in your life where you can, be able to take breaks, have some balance, have some recharge in there. But a lot of times you might have to, work 100 hours a week for a while to get to that point.
Yeah, exactly. The flywheel, the water pump.
Absolutely.
You got to keep rolling on that. Well, hey, man, this has been a great conversation. I always love when I meet somebody that it doesn't feel like a stretch of an interview. It's kind of like, oh wow, here we are, almost an hour into a conversation, and it's time to wrap things up.
All good.
Yeah, but I got a few questions for you. One is, if there's an author or somebody out there who is curious about connecting with you, how would they do that?
Yeah, so our website, atmospherepress.com, is the place to go. So it's a great resource. We've got, you can submit a manuscript on there. We've got a quiz to find out if you're ready for publication on there. We've got author interviews. We got free book giveaways on there. So it's just a pretty awesome resource for writers, whether they're ultimately going to work with us or not. So I definitely recommend checking that out.
Is there any genre that you focus in on more than others, or are you kind of free for all for anybody, like self-help all the way to mystery science novels?
Yeah. We're pretty free for all, like we work with some genres more than others. We do work with a lot of like memoir, fiction. Those are big genres for us, but we do love, business, self-help as well. We love those sort of entrepreneurial stories. So it's like if you're somebody who's got a book out there, you've got an idea, you're starting to put it together, we've got great editors that are going to be able to help you knock that thing out of the park.
Nice. And then what about support? Like, do you guys do any ghostwriting or writing for people, or do you have like connections for that?
Yeah, we definitely have connections for that. We have a team of ghostwriting partners who we have vetted, because if you just Google, like, find a ghostwriter, there's like way too many, right?
Right.
So we've actually have a list of ones that we've vetted that we know are legit. So that's something, if you're somebody who's got a bunch of ideas, but you haven't written them down, like, we have partnerships in place to help you out with that.
Nice. That's awesome. And we always like to leave everybody with a tip, going into next week. If you could give somebody a tip, whether it's something about starting writing their book. I know that's a lot. Like I run into so many people like, oh yeah, I want to write a book. I've been meaning to write a book. I've been thinking about writing a book. What is the one thing that you would tell somebody, like starting Monday, like, is it a habit? Is it some sort of, because you always hear like, well, just start. That's the step to take, is just start. But is there something beyond the just starting, or some sort of tip that you would give somebody to say, if you're thinking about writing a book or you want to do something like this is where you should begin?
Yeah, I mean, I have reams of advice for this, as you can imagine, and they always say like writer's block is nothing more than a failure to type, right?
Yeah.
But knowing that sometimes it is difficult to get the ball rolling, one thing I will throw out there is voice notes.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
Just start recording yourself, talking about the ideas that you have, and then soon enough those things will start taking shape, and then they can be put on the page, right? And with all the technologies today, all the transcription technologies and everything, like, I wrote one of my books, the large percentage of it was written through voice notes. Like I had long commutes, and I would just talk to myself, and I would just talk it out loud, and then I would go back and fix it up later.
Yeah.
So that's a great way, to end up creating a lot of content that is destined for a book without actually having to even put your fingers on a keyboard.
That's great. I love that. That's great advice. So start taking those voice memos and then compile that into a book. Or you can start a podcast and then compile that into a book. We've seen that done before. So... Hey, well, thanks so much for being here, hang out with us on the Friday Habit. I know there was some great nuggets of gold and truth that you share with us today, so I so appreciate that, and I know our audience does as well. And if you want to get show notes for this episode, you can head over to thefridayhabit.com. There you can also find links to our websites and ways to get in touch. And at the bottom of the page, you can download our guide to the Friday Habit system that'll show you how to set aside one full day each week dedicated to working on your business instead of always in your business. If you send us a note at hello@thefridayhabit.com, you can give us some thoughts about maybe things we should talk about. If you have somebody who'd be a good fit for the show, you can send them our way. And that's pretty much it. So remember, until next time, live every day like it's Friday.